Welcome back to Side Quests FF7RI, Final Fantasy VII Remake-Intergrade. Back with me, my constant companion and perennial party member, Wes Chance. Wes, good to see you.
Good to be back. Thanks for finding some time on this hectic weekend to talk about, Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade and kind of like a catch-all episode of all the stuff between whatever we talked about in the first one, like kind of the opening and all that. And then you've played a lot, but the last couple times we've just been talking to Otto about some specific um, portions, which I don't think I haven't seen, a playthrough of recently at least, and I don't think you've actually gotten to or through anyway the train graveyard. So kind of like just finding out where you're at and what you're thinking about the game, and I can share what I've seen, but again, it's been a little while, and it's been through the lens of our Professor Noctis, our colleague at distance here.
All right, well, okay, I'm very interested in hearing a little bit more about Professor Noctis, and I know that he's got a little bit of news that I've heard through you, and that I'm sure the listeners are interested in hearing too, because it regards a project that is very similar to our own project, and perhaps one that they would want to get into, respecting Zeitgeist. But just a little background, I've been playing Final Fantasy VII Remake-Intergrade now for about 10 hours. I had originally played about 10 hours of Remake on the PS4 version when it first came out during COVID. I bought the PS4 during COVID because of COVID. I actually bought my Switch as well during COVID for $300, not marked up. I was very proud of that. I'm still looking to do that with a Valve Steam Deck, which those are currently marked up to around $800.
Good luck. Yeah, good
Unless one
luck.
goes to eBay or Alibaba and sees some very suspiciously not marked up ones with from sellers that have no reviews, as it were. But something that I was supposed to do for last time was to make it through chapter 11, but I've
Mhm.
only made it to the middle of chapter 9. I'm traveling. I've gone through Aerith's house now, met her mom. Her mom told me, you sacrificed a normal life for power. This is new dialogue to some extent from Final Fantasy VII, and she recognizes that I'm a soldier. She says, please never see Aerith again. And I snuck out. I did this in one try this time around. Last time it took me 5 or 6 tries. And I thought I was getting away scot-free, but Aerith had apparently anticipated what I was going to do, and finds me in a tunnel and then has accompanied me through Sector 6. So just a couple of things to say about this. I really want to get to the train graveyard because that's where I was supposed to have gotten for our conversation with Otto last time. And I especially want to get past that because Otto wants to talk to us because his chat GPT AI client told him that the best time for him to come back on the show would be between chapters 14 and 15. So I'm eager to get there. But something about this game that sort of keeps me from moving too quickly, well, there are two things. One, I don't really know the game because even
Mhm.
though it is called remake, it it is much more than just a remake. It is in a lot of ways a totally different game, totally different battle mechanics, totally different enemies, totally different ways of fighting, and the locales, though often they have similar names, are much larger and have different puzzle elements to them. To that point, for this time, I said I was going to play 1 to 3 hours. I played about an hour and a half, and actually, I got on like 5 minutes late because I was in the middle of one of these insidious mini games that are thrust upon one, where I had to use these two mechanical claws to move various uh, cargo holds, or what do we call those? The things on the back of an 18-wheeler, container boxes, shipping
Mhm.
containers. There we are. And while also moving Aerith, and the controls were okay, but all this goes to say is that this whole sector 6 bit was it did allow for a little bit of dialogue between Aerith and Cloud, and she asked, "Do you have any war buddies?" And Rude had asked, or rather, Reno had asked earlier, "Which class of soldier are you?" And so there are these questions coming up from the Turks, Reno and Rude, who I fought now, and I can talk a little bit about those battles, and as well as Aerith, where they're asking questions that one would expect maybe a more positive answer. Like you are a member of this organization. You should have something positive to say about it. And by positive, I don't mean something good, but something definite. Like, yes, I
Mhm.
knew X, Y, Z. They were in soldier second class. I knew soldier third class people. I worked with the Turks in this capacity. He seems to sort of know some things, but he's not willing to say what he knows. And and so we're getting a lot of no, 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 but no to questions that would make me raise my eyebrow. And especially knowing a little bit of Aerith's backstory, having herself dated a soldier, first second class, then first class, Zach Fair. The idea that he doesn't have any war buddies, Cloud, is I there's an interesting interplay between sort of dropped silence that Aerith has after his responses, that is very much parallel to the sort of dropped silence that Tifa seems to have when
Yeah.
Cloud says things. There are for the two with the two love interests with whom he's being as forthright as he's being with anybody. There's clue after clue suggesting that Cloud is not either thinking straight or is lying or doesn't know his own past. Add to this the Mako sort of Genova cell reactions he has where things go green and he gets sucked into a hallucination. And I would say that as annoying as the game is to get through, and its many new mini games right now that have no nostalgic edge that bring me back to an early time and therefore increase my joy in getting through them, the game is doing a good job of setting up his mental breakdown. That said, as a player who's played Final Fantasy VII, podcasts on Final Fantasy VII, now written on Final Fantasy VII, the original, the OG, I'm I find myself hurrying through these what I consider sort of extraneous additions to get to the emotional core. And now, so to Otto's point last time, I understand wanting to take it all in and really enjoy Aerith's home and the time with Aerith, but I am myself fighting against myself and my desire to get to where it really is happening and enjoying the experience. Precisely because it is supposed to be a remake. So I'm expecting a certain sort of an adaptation of an experience I already have. But at the moment, I'm having sort of a slightly different experience. So it's not really the sort of adaptation that my native assumptions think that the game is, which I think helps to limit my joy and enjoyment of the newness and the developedness of it, but but uh but causes annoyance when I don't get to the when I'm not having the experience that I thought I might have, which is I don't know, just an expanded sense of the original feelings,
Mhm.
based on an expanded sense of the original characters and the original locales. Now, I'm not saying that that won't all come together, nor am I saying that that is the only way or the best way to adapt a game. But I think just hypothesizing, having thought a lot about Otto's very different reception of the game from me, he loves the game. He's also finished the game, unlike me. So I've really been thinking about that. Why is it that I'm sort of, I should take a step back and enjoy this and smell the artificial flowers or smell the Mako, as it were. But still the gameplay experience with another hour and a half dumped into it, getting through Sector 6, making it to Sector 7, having fought Rude after fighting Reno, it has not yet really hooked me. So it's a little bit different from Final Fantasy IX too in that respect. Whereas Final Fantasy IX I thought hooked me slower than 7 and 8, but did hook me in this most recent playthrough precisely when I was coming back from Europe and playing on the plane a ton.
Mhm.
Or sorry, coming back from I guess it was Morocco in this case, so not Europe, but playing on the plane a lot. But I would say Final Fantasy VII Remake has not hooked me yet, even though I am committed to this series of podcasts. I do want to get to the next one with Otto, and I do want to love this game. I mean, I I have no reason not to want to really, really, really love this game. So,
Right.
okay, so that's sort of my piece for now, and I've got more specific details I can talk about. I'm sorry that you are not. doing the fighting right now and the customizing because I think you would offer very valuable perspective on this as somebody who tends to mind the details a little bit better when it comes to gameplay, the ludic elements of video games. So I am missing your presence, I should also say there too.
I mean, I can connect you with people who are good at these things. Like Prof Noctis, he's not like really great at the game. He's at pains to say he's not that kind of streamer. But he's clearly played it enough that he understands the mechanics pretty well and can play it like on hard mode and stuff. It's pretty impressive.
Oh,
I
okay.
I imagine. I don't know. And but also my friend Steven, who is always sending me games, and we talk a lot about visual novels in particular, like Danganronpa and Isomnium Files, and stuff like that. He's like really good at video games.
Hmm.
Spent a lot of time in college getting good at Smash Brothers and training himself on old Mega Man and all kinds of. So
Mega Man.
he has
Yeah.
been playing the Remake-Intergrade cut and is similarly like dedicated to playing it on hard mode, which is quite a challenge, I guess. And he was telling me that the Hell House battle, which used to be in that sort of section 6 traversing on your way to Wall Market, has been moved to Wall Market itself, or maybe right after. And so he was asking me if anyone I've been watching or talking to has made it that far yet, because he's, I guess,
Almost,
pretty psyched
almost.
about that. Yeah,
I think for the
yeah.
next
So the
time
Hell
I
House.
will have made it there. Yeah.
So look forward to that, and um, just be on your guard because I guess it's significantly harder in this version, which I guess is kind of par for the course. Seems like everything is expanded and raised in complexity, difficulty, right? And just yeah, the way that the gameplay has fundamentally shifted, right, away from inputting commands and then letting the RNG do whatever it's going to do, maybe a critical hit, maybe a miss, whatever. Uh, and so everything is really about your prep before the battle, right? And those are the things that I'm actually more interested in, like the mechanics, the systems there, and how they promote or enable certain kinds of gameplay versus like, yeah, just like the actual technical, can you dodge, can you counterattack, right? Stuff like that. And not so much like understanding the weakness of the enemy as being able to exploit it in the moment. Um, that stuff is difficult for me. I get distracted. William, I think would be a little overwhelmed if we were playing it because it's pretty violent, it's a pretty mature game. I don't think I'd get to necessarily play it with him, and so he'd come and he'd want to have me play Legos or something. And then, so yeah, I'm sure that I will play it at some point, but for now, I'm quite content just watching playthroughs and getting a kind of a feel for it that way. So, I mean, the other thing, you could always just look up some kind of strategy guide or FAQ and be like, hey, here's one or two like top level um, exploits that will make this much easier, and I'll just implement those, and then maybe that I'm assuming that part of the issue, right, is that it's taking up a lot of time and presumably time that you'd rather put towards other things because there's a million of them. And so yeah, that's I think there's a certain level of like just you have to kind of let go of that, right? Or try to minimize it in some way. Otherwise, it's inevitably going to color the experience in a negative light unless it finally grabs you, and then it's like, okay, that time I've invested it has been well spent, right? That's kind of the trick with these big investments of these outlays where you're kind of waiting to see is this gonna pan out and in what way. Because if you have a certain expectation of what you're hoping to get out of this game and it's trying to give you something very different, then that's that's a disconnect. And it is, I think, helpful to hear from Otto that he's really appreciating these quieter moments within the game. And I think that's one thing. But it sounds like what you're describing is really more like the parts where you have to do all the stuff, like move the mechanical arms around and like figure out the battle mechanics and just that stuff. And I don't know if that's fun if you're not like feeling like you're getting better at it and feeling like it's working and clicking. Otherwise that just sounds tedious and frustrating. and,
It-
and that's something that the original game didn't have, right? It really they might have wanted to, like if they had the means, maybe they would have. And there's parts of the Shinra archaeology cut where they've identified like there is that hand. It's just a kind of graphic asset in the original game, but behind that there's like a little wire that was supposed to have some kind of mechanism, right? You were supposed to be able to control that hand in some way, or the wire on the crane, and like there was supposed to be some sort of platforming type element in that section, but it just was cut at some point. And yeah,
yeah, okay, so sigh. Real sigh followed by me saying sigh, la sigh, as it were, because
listen.
this is precisely the problem. So both Expedition 33 and Final Fantasy VII Remake are modern RPGs. They've come out in the last couple years, 2020 slash 2024, 2025, and 2025, right? Expedition 33 was Game of the Year through several different awards shows. But something that makes Expedition 33 tough is that one needs to learn how to parry and dodge, even though one is still in a battle screen and within and in a turn-by-turn RPG format. But it's really tough to learn to parry and dodge on one's own. I think perhaps a very gifted player could learn. And again, this comes with like the time and experimentation. Like, I
Mhm.
think from the game itself, you might be able to learn when in the attack animations you have to parry and dodge, but it's often high stakes and would probably make more sense to have consulted a strategy guide. But to your point, I think something we're realizing taking on this game and its magnificent, what is it people would say from our time, its ginormous scope, just to reduce the linguistic level a little bit, or and raising it back up a little bit, so the enormity of it all is is what I think the original players wanted. And like you said, in order to really give this game a fair shake as an adaptation, I can't just play it. I can't just play it because I can't just figure it out. It has problems, or there are features in it that take more training than the game itself will probably give me. And so there's a calculus for how much time and energy do I want to put into the game. Well, I want to put in the most efficient amount of time and energy in order to get the best experience. But what does that mean? So even that question is not yet now determined, because if I were playing Final Fantasy 7, 8, or 9, there was a very limited amount of strategy guide that I need at this point, having gone through those games before. So I kind
Mhm.
of know the sorts of things that I need to do, even if I forget the particular reference within some particular map or quest. Here, I know much less of what is going to happen and the range of things that can happen. And so, like, something that I'm running into is that I can buy materia. Which materia do I need to have? Which, pieces of equipment should I have on that have more or fewer materia slots? Can I mix the materia with my attack? It looks like yes. But all of this is stuff that I have to look into. And then I should be looking at strategy guides to figure out which materia I should have in order to fight certain bosses. Something else frustrating about bosses that's very similar to Expedition 33 is that Rude, like Reno, they can counter your attacks, and they have certain
Mhm.
attacks that they shoot that you can avoid. Some you have to block. You have a block function. Some you can dive roll away from, and then some it's like impossible to get away from them. Rude has this jump kick. I didn't get away from it a single time. He has this move where he runs after you and tackles you and then throws you. You can't block it, and I couldn't get away from him.
Right.
And so in order to have done that fight more elegantly, I would have had to actually presuppose it. I should have gone to the strategy guide first and looked into it. But even more than that, in order to enjoy not just that fight and get it through that fight efficiently and effectively, it took me only two times to get through it, but it was frustrating because I kept getting hit by the same moves, and it took way more rounds than it probably should have. But like you said, I should probably be watching the Professor Noctis and also reading the Shinra archaeology experiment, is that the last word with it?
The
Department,
cut of the original game. Yeah, yeah.
in order just to see the details that they observe that show what has been adapted, what the original purpose of the original map was, and how that's been correctly purposed, or now some or the elements that were supposed to be part of the first map are now included in the second map in a more and so what seems to me just playing through the game as an annoying addition is in fact an intelligent uh, re-included bit from the first game, but with a
Yeah.
functional element that it was supposed to have. That changes my perception of what I just went. But in the moment of going through it, it was annoying. And and so that is something I'm struggling with now. Like you said, it seems like really to talk about this game in the way that we like to talk about games, I'm going to have to do a lot more work than just playing the game and having played Final Fantasy VII. And something nice about you going through the game in a non-manual way, I guess you might say, is that you are getting access to some of those seemingly necessary materials. It's almost like Final Fantasy VII Remake is like a graduate course as opposed to an undergraduate. You don't just get the book itself. Now you get some of the scholarly apparatus with it in order to teach you how to read the books and how scholars read the books, as it were. Um, my book over there, Beginning Adaptation, that I recommended to a YouTube commentator recently.
There you go.
But but right, so I it is my it seems like from this conversation, it is my own myopism, my own desire that this game simply be something that I natively assume that it is, whereas it is actually much more. And I'm missing that much more element because I'm not digging like these archaeologists from Shinra as deeply as I should. And that some of these decisions are not just filler or content uh, adders, but are what we've talked about before, attempts to appropriate elements from the first game that didn't get integrated in the ways that the developers really wanted to integrate them, and now include them and make them functional. In particular, using these damn hands, which I hate so much. I hated that so much, and you can bang them against things. It's very luckily there are certain places that you have to put the cargo holds, or sorry, the cargo containers, the shipping containers. There we are. It takes me 2 or 3 times to get those each time. Not a trucker. Not yet. Though I do like Big Trouble in Little China. But so yes, so it's almost like every time I talk to you or Otto, I'm hearing that I have not done my homework. I should have done my homework. And if I did my homework, I would like this game more.
Well, look, you've allocated your time differently, right? I haven't done the work either. I haven't played the game at all. I've just watched. And so my experience is purely vicarious, purely secondhand or third or whatever. And so it's different layers of the thing that's there, right? And so whereas I'm kind of content with my perspective on the thing, it sounds like you might want to rethink how you've allocated your skill points there and your time, right? And so the the question, I guess, is also about, you know, looking closely at the characters, especially Cloud, right? The version of this character that we have in this game is is interesting because even in the original game, he essentially is an enigma to the player and himself, right? There are hints that something is up with him. They're just more subtle, or they're not translated, as clearly, or whatever it is. So the nature of the mystery is different, of course, too, because we have a sense of what the answer to those riddles was in the original game. And now in this game, the question is like, are they the same kinds of answers that we're going to get, or are these sort of like Cloud 2.0, where all of that stuff from the first game is having some weird amalgamation with all of these reimaginings and recoveries of original ideas that are then getting mashed together in some interesting slash frustrating soup of that's a totally new experience, right? And I think Eris is a part of that too. Aerith, rather, she seems to have some kind of connection to knowledge outside of the ordinary, some sort of perception of what's going on. And again, that's hinted at in the original game, but it's made way more clear and way more explicit here by, like, we can also see these whispers and they're doing stuff and we're fighting them and this and that, right? And so if she has a kind of prophetic ability, that would make sense. But she also might simply have certain memories from experiences in that other world of the original game, right? If that's some sort of parallel universe to which she has some sort of access via these whispers and whatever entities she's in contact with, you know. Ditto for Tifa, like her presentation here is almost a kind of saintly figure, right? Within the slums, she's like knowledgeable, she's practical, and of course she cares about Cloud um, and his well-being. And at the same time, she's kind of the voice of reason of like, you know, maybe the terrorism is not the way to go. And whereas Barrett, he's like amped up as this almost like street corner preacher figure this time. You know, he's so gung ho, he's so um, you know, okay with collateral damage. And then we see, you know, the Shinra um, manipulation of information as well as actually like changing events, right, in ways that if they happened in the original game, we were not privy to. And this time the camera does show us, you know, what's going on in the security systems of Shinra and how they're, you know, making everything worse than it would otherwise have been, right? And so there's just a lot of extra complexity that's kind of brought to the foreground in this version of these characters and their relationships and the plot events so far, um, to which you have to then add or perhaps have to hold apart if you're not interested in it. All of the extra gameplay stuff, right? Which is kind of where your frustration seems to come in. It's like, but if you there's all these mini games and there's all this like fiddling around with materia slots and stuff, like it's harder to kind of concentrate on all of the story and you know thematics material that's being presented. And I mean, ideally, those things would sort of like go hand in hand, right? Mechanical hand in hand, maybe. Like the things that are changed about the systems reinforce the things that are changed about the thematics in a way that enriches them rather than diminishes them. Now, I can't say because I'm, again, not playing, but my impression is that the audience is very divided on this. Like there are people who feel strongly in both camps. Prof. Noctis and Otto are both very positive and really like the things that this game is doing. But I know that there's many other, you know, rather shrill voices out there that are like, this is not an appropriate remake, reimagining, whatever this is. It's not what I wanted, and I don't want it to exist. You know, and people get like I think inordinately upset about the fact that it's just another version of this game. Like in some way, it overshadows the original game for them and colors it in a way that they just don't want to be, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think so. To your point, a couple things. We both recently saw the information that people who are playing Final Fantasy 16 are more likely to have played Final Fantasy 13 as their first game in the series, rather than Final Fantasy 4, 5, 6, or 7, like many of the other people. And Final Fantasy 13 is a lot like Final Fantasy 10 and also Kingdom Hearts. It's like Final Fantasy 10 in that it's lots of corridors, pretty linear. But I think that the fighting, and I haven't played 13 though, I do have it purchased on my Xbox Series S, and so I'm looking forward to it because I hear it's a good one. And also deeply related to Final Fantasy 15, which is having its 10-year anniversary, which is amazing how rarely Final Fantasies come out nowadays, which was originally supposed to be Final Fantasy 13 Versus. Um, but um, but now, so since the game has been remade, there are at least a couple different generations of gamers that the remake might ostensibly be attempting to cater itself to. Particularly because we know since remakes are being made, sequels, gacha games, cell phone games, and extended universes like Final Fantasy 13, Final Fantasy 10, Final Fantasy 7 now. This is obviously part of the corporate strategy of Square Enix.
Right.
Moving away from Hironobu Sakaguchi's vision for Final Fantasy, where every year you have to pump out something great and it's always new. There's just a totally different corporate strategy. It cares much less about games coming out frequently. It cares much less about games not being sequels and building on each other. And so we have people who grew up under differing stewardships. So we grew up in the Sakaguchi era, but people under the Final Fantasy or who grew up in the Final Fantasy 13 era are probably going to be much more pro sequel and remakes. And so all that just goes to say is that some of the changes that have been made are not made for the original players, but are made in order to make the game accessible and appetizing to a large swathe of gamers in order to make this game both marketable and profitable, which is ultimately what Square Enix as a company with a corporate strategy is seeking to do, even with these artistic products. But like we've talked about before, that can make it so that certain people who are purists either in one camp or another are going to obviously be pretty upset about the fact that these new elements are included. I don't put myself in that camp or in either of those camps yet because I'm still trying to determine what camp I'm in through experiencing the game and what I like and what I dislike and considering or uncovering, digging up my own native assumptions coming into it. But okay, so all that goes to say is that so there's even more in Final Fantasy VII Remake than one might expect to be there, besides themes and maps and elements that were underdeveloped in the first game due to processing time and money requirements, and maybe even just like the state of the art at the time, because that was the state of the art. But now there are elements from games that you and I didn't even play when they first came out that are now the epoch-making games or the formative games for players who are playing Remake alongside us. I want to try and tie that to this point, but it might be too loose a connection. Again, when we grew up under Sakaguchi, the games were coming out once a year. Final Fantasy VI, then 7, then 8, then 9. Chrono Trigger comes out right then. So does Xenogears. So Square was coming out with tons of games. And so
Yep.
we were inundated with new content and new worlds. And even if we didn't like 1, if you didn't really like 8, well, 9 came out right after that, and you probably liked 9 a lot if you didn't like 8 because they're so different from each other. And then 10 comes out not even a year after that. But now the production schedules are okay. So this is the connection. How bent out of shape could you get about Final Fantasy VIII if 1 year before that Final Fantasy VII came out, which you loved, and 1 year after it Final Fantasy IX came out that you loved? Just say, well, that was sort of my bête noire or like a dud. But here,
Hmm.
Final Fantasy 15 came out 10 years ago and was first announced 20 years ago, 2006. And it came out in 2016. You see where I'm going with this. And 2026, we have Final Fantasy 15. They have a chibi version of it that they've put out now, again, in their typical Square Enix, just expanding the content that they can sell with limited integrity, which I'm perfectly fine to say because I think it's very obvious that that's what they're doing. And I understand that companies have to make money. I really do. But we only have, in the last 10 years, Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 16. So when these games get criticized, it seems like there's a lot more at stake. These games are not the same things to the players playing them now because they are not inundated with them. They are not the top RPG that is coming out, arguably. But, in the late 90s, even with Xenogears, even with Legend of Dragoon, Legend of Legaia, Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, Final Fantasy VII came out so frequently and with such critical acclaim that it's really hard to say that it wasn't the top series. I mean, maybe against Dragon Quest, but then you have different localization issues. One in Japan does very well, one in the US and the West does very well. But so when the remake, it came out in 2020, there's a second part of it, which is right over there, not Rebirth. Very good. Sorry, I'm like revisiting. They came out like 3 or 4 years after that. But the third part, and this was your argument about even about not starting the series yet is still not out. And the debate
Yeah,
is it going to come out in 2027 or 2028? When there are new systems potentially coming out that don't even have the games to support the need for them at this point because people on the PS5 on message boards say that they're still playing lots of PS4 games. And so why should there be a PS6 at this point? So okay, all that goes to say is that there is even more, I think, and feel included in these games because there are more gamers to appease and to appeal to. And the production schedules are so much longer that it seems like it's actually a much bigger deal if a Final Fantasy comes out that you don't like. Well, the next one might come out in 6 or 7 years. Hopefully, you like that. You'll be in a different place in your life. I mean, William will be in like eighth grade and maybe not even like video games anymore at that point. Hopefully, he does. I in eighth grade definitely liked them because I was not cool, but William might be cool.
that's right.
And I would say he seems like he's going to be cool. So I'll throw a bet out there for that. But okay, so more in the games and longer time between them, even though there are more games overall to choose from. But that again hurts the sort of legacy and the impact of a single series as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think with the history of the series in view, Seven Remake has a really important function then, right? Of possibly showing another path forward where it's not just that every 10 years a new game comes out, but that every few years there's some sort of reimagining of a past game or something like that, right? That helps with the um the new generations finding out about those games, accessing them in a way that is up to date with the state of the art that they're expecting, that might be able to activate some sort of nostalgia for those players who did experience the original games in their original context, and that in some way might help with this problem of the enormity of the outlay of time and money and expertise for creating a totally new game on new systems, every decade or whatever it is. I mean, I don't know that that's entirely satisfactory. I'm sure that it's not. Um, but it's interesting to me that within the, you know, the wider market, there's also this space of indie games that develops, within the last 10 to 20 years and has kind of probably peaked and now is just, a niche market. But it's very doable to actually, make a game like those
Hmm.
that we were familiar with for oneself. And I think a lot of creative energy is going in that direction, actually, rather than a kind of nostalgia, or maybe another expression of that nostalgia. And
Okay. For
and
example.
was that?
Is it Undertale? What is the name of the game
Yeah.
that just came out that but Square Enix put out that is the 2D sprites? Is it
Oh,
there's the second version too. It might not be Undertale.
uh,
Uh
no, no, Undertale's a separate. Yeah, that's the truly indie project. I mean, I know that Sakaguchi actually kind of created his own studio and has made some games of his own since leaving Square. Um, yeah, and I think that there's some really um, cool ways in which what was edge technology is now very accessible, much more easy to use, and still going to require a lot of work to learn and get good at. But at least it's like there's a kind of parity, among just common people to be able to access that stuff where once it was only, these couple of companies that had the means. Um, so, with a a wider view of the market, um, no, those things are very unlikely to actually get critical or, popularity, any kind of return, monetary or otherwise, on the work that goes into them. But it is at least another alternative, right? Another path. Um, and I don't know if it's like a real way out or just a way that I'm fancying, a way out of this kind of like relentless drive to have the bigger, better, more expensive, more amazing thing come out, every decade or whatever. Um, I don't like thinking that we're sort of locked into that as the only paradigm for like progress, moving the art forward, right? That there is some other route, um, is important for me, at least as a something to imagine, right? Something to um, think of as a possibility. I don't know that I will ever get around to making my video game, but when I was a kid, playing these games, I thought about all these ideas that I would like write down in my notebook, in my journal, like here's how I would make my video game, and I design the characters this way and the maps like this, and I, have all my stories about them and stuff. And so that's very far from like a playable game, but it's at least, a lot more doable now than it was then. The technology with like an RPG maker, which I think is what Toby Fox used for Undertale, in the mid 2000s when that came out. But he of course like trained, got his chops doing hacking on Earthbound and stuff. So he like knew a lot of programming as well as the design, the music, the story, like all that stuff. So yeah, that's all just to like come back to your point, like which I think is a good one, irrefutable, really, that the, the landscape is very different now. Yeah, and um, it becomes kind of a pedagogical question of like how do we who really appreciate things about the older art direct people back towards it? How do we, in the same breath, want to kind of push the art forward in a different direction from what we see if we're not like happy with it?
Yeah, so that's you said several really interesting things. And so what I meant to or which game I meant to reference was Octopath Traveler. And
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Octopath Traveler 2 as well, which is a conscious going back to 2D sort of sprites, right? And I think Sea of Stars was attempting to do that as well. So like you said, there are different ways one can go these days. So yeah, pursuing the AAA sort of biggest possible, most monumental, most technologically sophisticated game is something that is tied to Final Fantasies and is part of why Final Fantasy VII moved from the Super Nintendo to the PlayStation. There's just more that could be done. But that was not always the case during the Super Nintendo era. And so something sort of interesting about what you're saying, thinking about independent games, is that obviously one of the great games that came out this last year, Expedition 33, was made by people who came from a major studio, but then started their own. And so that game was not necessarily supposed to be AAA, didn't have the same sort of budget that a normal AAA game does, nor even size of team, and yet pulled off a magnificent game that didn't even seem to have a reduction in its characterization or its graphics. It certainly they spent a third of their budget on music, so the music is very good. But they made their choices, and their choices made the game pop. And something about games popping or being unique or different or having something special about them is that acts as a sort of as a hook for consumers.
Mhm.
It's like, wow, that's different. I don't play a lot of RPGs like Dragon Quest because I think they're derivative. I'm like,
Mhm.
well, why would I want? I don't just want an RPG experience as a game player, and especially as a game player with only limited times. I want the masterpieces. I want the games that people think are the best ones ever. Now, if I had a lot more time, I could really get into just RPGs or video games themselves. RPGs are themselves very interesting as video games, right? Because they predate video game systems. So they just sort of like adapted themselves to video games. So I can see why there's some argument between, like, say, ludic theorists and narratologists and where are RPGs actually supposed to be there because right, they just sort of they sold very well and so were adapted into the medium and have become a major part of the medium. But all that goes to say is that Square Enix's current sort of way of expanding Final Fantasy universes is to actually expand singular Final Fantasy universes. Final Fantasy 10, 13, 7, the expanded universe. Now, you can do that, but there's also sort of like the Dissidia model and the Super Smash Brothers model
All
where
right.
you can bring all of these characters together from different universes if you want to do that as a separate installation. But but that, or I perhaps I've misnamed the model, but what could be done instead of just going after AAA games or continuing to expand on worlds that have shown themselves to be profitable is to go to a model much more similar to Sakaguchi's to produce games in the same series faster, perhaps using fewer resources, perhaps splitting teams as happened, as we know, with Final Fantasies 8, 9, and 10, and putting them out with more frequency to see if consumers will buy them. Um, it in this way, then one is expanding one's profit offerings or product offerings, potentially expanding profit streams while having on on a known quantity, which is Final Fantasy, though perhaps going in differing directions. But in so far as the games are produced more frequently, they can go in differing directions in less catastrophic ways. Like, Spirits Within had a very negative effect on Square that led to Square becoming Square Enix. There have been a couple misses like that in their time, and that was unfortunately Sakaguchi's miss.
Mhm.
But there's nothing barring them going back to a model where they produce a Final Fantasy a year or two or so, perhaps put less money into it, perhaps put less, have a smaller team for each of them, but then also produce new games and new worlds consistently. That will continue to expand the Final Fantasy universe, which is the so-called Dissidia universe that I'm talking about, without just focusing on particular IPs within Final Fantasy. I do see that as a direction that Square Enix has gone and one that can be gone in, but there's no reason. Again, I really don't see any reason why they couldn't implement a more Sakaguchi based one that perhaps had less input than these current games, but potentially more output, and also led to more creative adaptation. Because with more games coming out more frequently, one gets more data from consumers about what they like, what they dislike. It's easier to hook them and to get them to buy into more of these iterations of games, and then if one finds one that just like all of a sudden there are 30 million units sold compared to like 8 million with each, well then maybe that is your cash cow, your golden goose, as it were.
Right.
But it's hard to find these golden geese when you're only coming out with something so frequently. And even though, again, they're coming out with all sorts of interesting things, like I said, Octopath Traveler, Nier Automata, a lot of
Mhm.
cool stuff. Final Fantasy would seem to be the most profitable JRPG series of all time, and so I think there are different. Let's send this to Square Enix, but I do think they could take a different model and be just as profitable, but potentially more creative.
Yeah, I don't know the message that would send their investors or whatever kind of knock-on effects that would have that might be a problem for them. But it does sound like the kind of thing that would excite, you know, people working there, right? People who um are the fans, like the hardcore fans of the series. And just in
Usually they would
general.
need a new CEO. That's just what it would take. Bring in a new CEO. He has a new corporate vision. He does this. Maybe it is Sakaguchi. I don't know. Sorry.
No, yeah, that's the question, right? Is their vision and their leadership and their purpose behind kind of those large scale decisions is is opaque to me. What exactly that is. Um, I guess the episode 33 example is really the one that we can kind of hang your hat on and say like, well, like observe what they did, learn from that, maybe reverse engineer something like that. And yeah, in the old days, they had sort of like separate teams working on separate projects all at the same time. And then that was how they were able to roll those out with such frequency. And yeah, I don't know if the indie market is able to produce an episode 33 reliably. But it does seem like for everything else, Square is able to produce these hits, over and over and over. Um, Whether they're worried about diluting that, right? And so they really have become very deliberate about putting the FF name onto things, versus, yeah, sort of other monikers and IPs. Um, yeah, and again, at a certain point, I think players just can't keep up, right? Like, there's no way to play all of these games in a reasonable time frame, much less, dig into them with the kind of attention and depth that they would deserve, right? Um, and so that is probably also playing into things there, their decision making on feeling like they can afford to wait another year or two, and that audience will still be there. They're not gonna lose them.
It'll be really interesting when uh the Final Fantasy third I guess the Final Fantasy 13 generation is already podcasting, but seeing what their favorite games are and what their experiences are, because I wonder if they're going to be less series based and more just individual titles or systems based, like whether there will be like Xbox people, Nintendo people, Sony people, or I think Nintendo's sort of stayed true to their core throughout their iterations with their children-based games, their young person-based games, and pop in colors, big eyes, things that appeal at a sensual level, especially to a young person. But I really think that even there may be lots of fans among the Final Fantasy 13 and even the newer generations of Square Enix, but I wonder what they think of Final Fantasy. They've seen what, two in or three in their lifetime, and then a number of remakes and remasters and additions to the world, particularly in Final Fantasy VII. I think there are like 8 or 9 games in the compendium of that now. Crisis
Right.
4, Ever Crisis. There's Type Zero, there's Sephiroth when he was young game now. But yeah, it strikes me more and more that we were in a golden age and that we were lucky to have a sort of experience with these video games that I don't know is accessible to people in their formative periods now, where these geniuses under this artist of extraordinary integrity, Hironobu Sakaguchi, who's often working with other incredible artists like Toriyama, the Dragon Ball animator, uh, Uematsu with the music, and then I guess Nomura shows up at some time with the storytelling, and so yeah, from just an aesthetic level, I think it is going to be hard to have the sort of compounding experience that led to the overall age experience that we had, the golden age. And and I worry about that for aesthetic reasons, though I would say I worry about that less from money reasons, though I do think there is a connection between value and money when it comes to companies, particularly ones that sell pieces of art like these games. They need there's a certain level of value that needs to be present to justify the expense. And video games are going up in expense with AI buying up RAM, and also various wars making things more expensive. We have inflation in our country right now. Things are expensive. So the games have to be good. But I'm glad that we got more to this conversation and away from the adaptation itself, just because, yeah, I guess I don't worry so much for the young people so much as pity them, and that this we really had the world all ahead of us, and we had the world served to us on a platter to some extent. So well, hopefully there we'll have to see tomorrow. So okay. Waxing poetic aside, we are talking tomorrow, also side quests, our supposedly ultimate conversation on Chrono Trigger with author Patrick Holloman of Reverse Design fame. He's written several of them on Final Fantasy VI, 7, Super Mario World, I think Half-Life, Chrono Trigger, and perhaps a couple others as well. But we're going to be talking specifically about Chrono Trigger and a little bit of Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah, and he's also made a game like quite recently, actually, I think, an indie game called Quartet that he worked on for a long time. And he works as a sort of a contractor consultant for people making games, right? And looking at their work, giving them feedback, helping them with certain technical or just general problems that they're running into. So that's kind of like his whole thing's like a freelancer, writer as well as developer. And I haven't had a chance to play Quartet yet, but I was at least looking into the possibility, right, of putting it on my my list here.
Wow, we
And
got
I was curious to talk to him about that tomorrow. Yeah, kind of the theory practice thing that he's up to. Um,
okay.
I did also want to ask before we go, if you have a second, or if you want to do this another time, about the multi-platform call for paper this year is around the theme of poetry. I know you put one in about Dante, right? So yeah, if you wanted to, because it's still a little ways. I thought it was due like in a couple of days. It's not due till the 10th of April. So people out there might still have time to throw a paper in there.
Okay, so the multi-platform folks over at Manchester at the Manchester Game Center at Manchester Metropolitan University in Manchester, UK, cool place, cool group of people, are doing their multi-platform conference again, which was called Rituals of Play last year. And this year is on, I'm sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. I'm not reading it, but it's on poetry and video games. Um,
Poetry and games slash games and poetry
yeah,
is the
and
title.
not
Yeah.
just video games, because they actually, one of the scholars there, Chloe Germain, does a lot with board games. And so that's something I always have to remind myself, because the vast majority of games I play when I play games, which is not as much as I wish it were,
Mhm.
are video games. So I have to think of video games. But obviously, there are lots of games, right? They're like children's games. So, you can play dodgeball is a game, maybe more of a sport. But then the like board games are games, and those have their own ludology to them as well. And so, yes, as a Dante scholar who sort of moonlights as a video game podcaster and scholar, becoming more of a scholar, but there's a lot that needs to be read. Um, I suggested a work that I really want to submit to Biblioteca Dantesca in this round, though I don't know if I'm ever going to have time to write it on Final Fantasy IX and Dante. At the end of my last essay on Dante and Final Fantasy VII and VIII, mostly, I talked about some of the connections that remain to be made between Final Fantasy IX and Dante, and I'm looking to make more of those and perhaps continue to work out my theory of adaptation. Something I also want to do is get into contact with Square and maybe one of their figures there and see if any of them can give me some inside information that wouldn't, be anything for them. It's not IP or anything. Like, did Hironobu Sakaguchi like have a big copy of the Divine Comedy on his desk, or like was there any known influence, or like was there some compendium of mythology that some of them had access to or were reading, because that is something that I suspect could be known, and suspect could, it the simple solutions do exist, and that wouldn't solve many of the problems that I write about so much as that would be a clear indication that they were trying to integrate many of these ideas that I think that I've identified in the works. So yeah.
There's a lot of material out there about FF7. I know there's a long oral history that has been put together. And there, even Resonant Arc has had a chance to interview Sakaguchi on one of their videos from, I mean, a few years ago, I think. So it can be done, but I don't know if Square would be the way to do it. I don't know
Well,
how
not for
they
Sakaguchi.
scored that interview. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, and I guess there's also the question of like um, how many various people are involved, um, to what extent, while individuals within the team might have had a certain intention going in, right? That all gets like put together in a really, really complicated, like, I don't know if it's traceable at all to say like this particular influence, we can see it kind of threading its way through, because of like, yeah, Sakaguchi, Nomura, Kato, however many other people were involved in like the story alone, and then all the character designs and stuff. Like, yeah, I think those sorts of questions are really tricky. Um, but I mean, in terms of just like where are the um, irrefutable like pieces of evidence that uh, suggest that this idea was intended, like that, I think is important, and it's important insofar as like these games do represent a new iteration on the epic tradition, right? Like, because that's the sort of like anxiety of influence coming into play, right? Like the idea that there is this poet before me in time who I want to amalgamate, transform and outdo in some way in my output, in my work. Um, and if they, have that in certainly in terms of like the genres that they're imbibing, right? They played Ultima or Wizardry or whatever. That's like pretty established. And so there's that piece, the game piece. But then as far as like stories, mythology, right? It's mostly in the form of names, illusions, those kinds of like maybe iconography and things like that that come into the games. And I mean, I think yeah, there's definitely enough Dante stuff to point to in that regard. Um, but
Yes, it would be really
yeah,
helpful to hear that they were talking about spirals because of the
yeah,
Inferno at some lunch. This is why they should always have biographies from major figures. So Sakaguchi needs to get on that. But yeah, to your point, it's interesting how there is just moving in a different direction. Yeah, the attempt by the artists at Square, the game designers, to create a more cosmopolitan or world mythology rather than simply geographically based. Like we're going to take some Spanish, some Latin American deities, some like
right.
Greek ones, some Arabic Muslim ones as well, like Afrit, and we're going to throw them. We're going to kind of throw them all together into this world, and so they're like the ultimate symbols from specific traditions in the universe and brought together. This again, like the notion of Final Fantasy itself, and you can see this, and also a Dissidia is bring it all together and see where it stands. So it's ultimately syncretic in that way, and so there's something to be said. And perhaps I'll get to saying it in print at some point here about the attempt to continually adapt material and ideas, notions, characters, gods, from one tradition into another, um, but not just for particularist reasons here. This isn't like taking an Italian concept and making it Japanese, but making it worldwide rather than Italian or just Japanese or American. It is accessible to all in some way, or at least it integrates so much more than anything ever has that comes from its own individual tradition. Though that's kind of an interesting question too. Can tradition itself be richer than a mixture of many traditions? I suppose it depends. Those Greeks were pretty good. Though a lot of people suggest many of their good ideas came from the Indians and the Egyptians, but then
Mm-hmm.
but their real gift was in make so they didn't invent the car, but then they made the Lamborghini. Would be sort of the argument. Though obviously that's Italian and anachronistic. Not a good analogy, but yeah, I think it is good and that you understand what that means. But or one does. But yeah, so Well, more questions than answers at the end of this talk, and I've got to keep playing this a little bit. Looking forward to talking about it with you more. I'm looking forward to, oh yeah, and so all of that was a digression too. What are you writing about on multi-platform before we go?
Oh, I'm planning on submitting something. When I saw that the deadline wasn't the first, I was like, okay, phew, I don't have to do it this weekend. But I probably should start it. Um there was a call for papers a long time ago, I mean, a few years ago, about music and nostalgia. And I put together a short thing about Earthbound, and like this is what you're looking for, basically, it's right here. Didn't ever hear back from them one way or the other. I think that book did come out though, and I read some stuff out of it. I think that's where I found Tim Summers actually and his work, and he's amazing. I had a chance to interview him last summer, or spring, or something, and still, yeah, have a lot of admiration for stuff he does with music and video games. And anyhow, so between the the write up that I did about the music in Earthbound, and then this more recent thing of theoretically I'm trying to learn Japanese and I want to play Earthbound in the original Mother 2 text, which is available out there in the internets. Um, Looking at certain poetic moments in that game essentially, and concocting some sort of thesis or argument about the way in which player experience is somehow, what we do when we play Earthbound is akin to the recitation of a poem, the composition of a poem, or something like that. Because it's a game that involves the player going around collecting these melodies rather, but connected with each melody is a memory. And these are sort of building up a picture of who this protagonist is and how he's connected to this world. Um, yeah. So the oral history of Final Fantasy VII, it's been published as a book, which I didn't know. I think that it was originally just a thing from Polygon, so the web magazine or whatever you want to call it. Polygon's Matt Leone is the person behind it. It looks like they did a Kickstarter and have the big book that's come out of that. So yeah, that might I don't know if that would actually answer your question, or at least give you a few leads on who to try to ask.
Yeah, no, there are plenty of people to track down and ask questions from, and all that's part of the scholarly process. But yeah, okay, so we're going to meet tomorrow and talk about that. Then we've got Don Giovanni later in the week with Babcock, comparing that to Don Juan. Pretty different so far, but looking forward to
A little bit.
exploring that with you gentlemen. And then moving on to Tristan Shandy. And and yeah, well, that's what I think the week has in store for us at least, and I'm looking
That
forward to it.
sounds good. Thanks again. Yeah, see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Take care.